why you wouldn't last 10 seconds against an English longbowman. You've seen movies where archers stand in clean rows, waiting for a polite signal to release a pretty cloud of arrows. Forget that. If you were a French knight at Agincourt in 1415, the last thing you'd see isn't a cloud. It's a localized storm of 5,000 armor-piercing bodkin points, traveling at 150 feet per second, specifically aimed at your face. An English longbowman wasn't a ranged soldier. He was a human siege engine with shoulders wider than your doorway and hands so deformed by repetitive stress that he couldn't fully close his fingers. In the next 10 seconds, the physics of a 150-pound draw weight is going to turn your expensive steel suit into a metal coffin. The first thing you have to understand is that an English longbow wasn't a toy. It was a 6-foot slab of wood that required a lifetime of physical torture to master. Skeletal remains of these archers show archery spurs, thick ridges of bone grown on their left shoulders, to cope with the sheer structural pressure of the draw. When that archer pulls back, he isn't just using his arm. He is laying his body into the bow, a technique that uses his entire back and core to hold back over 150 pounds of tension. You aren't facing a man, you're facing a biological hydraulic press. By the time you've taken 3 steps into the mud of Agincourt, he has already loosed 3 arrows, and each one is a specialized killing tool designed for you. The geographer's Agincourt is your second enemy. The field is a bottleneck of deep churned up clay. As a knight, you are wearing 60 pounds of plate armor, sinking to your calves in the muck. You are moving in slow motion. The longbowman, meanwhile, is standing behind a line of sharpened oak stakes he hammered into the ground. He is lightly armored, mobile, and breathing steadily. He isn't aiming at the army. He's picking out the gap in your visor or the thin steel at your armpit. The 10 seconds starts the moment you enter his kill zone at 200 yards. In that window, he can fire 4 arrows. That's not a volley. That's a constant stream of high-velocity lead and steel coming at your head. The sound is what truly breaks your spirit. 5,000 archers firing at once creates a low-frequency hum, a hiss of air being sliced by feathers. That grows into a roar as the arrows descend. It's been described by survivors as the sound of a winter gale ripping through trees. Inside your helmet, the sound is magnified. You are trapped in a dark, hot, echoing metal bucket, hearing the clack, clack, clack of heavy shafts bouncing off your chest plate like hail on a tin roof. Every clack is a dice roll with your life, and the archer is throwing the dice 6 times a minute. You might think your plate armor makes you invincible, but the English had spent a century perfecting the bodkin point. This wasn't a wide, leaf-shaped arrow for hunting deer. It was a square-sectioned, hardened steel spike. Its only purpose was to concentrate all the kinetic energy of a 100-mile-per-hour flight onto a single, microscopic point. At close range, a longbow arrow has the punching power of a .357 Magnum. If it hits you squarely, it doesn't just hit the steel, it shears through it. Even if it doesn't penetrate your chest, the blunt force trauma is enough to crack ribs, collapse lungs, or knock you unconscious into the mud, where you will slowly suffocate under the weight of the men falling on top of you. The naked reality of Agincourt was the technical failure of the French elite. Because the archers were firing so fast, the French knights were forced to lower their heads to keep the arrows from going through their eye slits. This meant they couldn't see where they were going. They were stumbling blindly through the mud, bumping into each other, creating a human traffic jam. The archers didn't even have to be precise anymore. They were just pumping iron into a dense mass of meat and metal. Your expansive education in chivalry and swordplay is useless when you're being treated like a pincushion by a peasant who hasn't eaten a full meal in 3 days. Then there is the shatter effect. When an arrow hits a helmet and doesn't penetrate, it often shatters, sending splinters of wood and shards of steel into the gaps of your armor. If an arrow hits your horse, the animal goes into a blind, screaming panic, throwing the entire line into chaos. The archers aren't just killing men. They are dismantling the system of medieval warfare. They are turning a coordinated charge into a desperate, muddy scramble for survival. By the time you get within 50 yards, you aren't a knight anymore. You're a panicked survivor trying to remember how to breathe. The movies always end when the arrows run out. But at Agincourt, that was just the beginning of the nightmare. Once the French lines were broken and stalled in the mud, the archers didn't just sit back. They dropped their bows, pulled out lead-weighted mallets, hatchets, and long, thin misericord daggers. These men were fast, unencumbered by heavy plate, and they were angry. They swarmed the fallen knights like ants on a beetle. Because you are trapped in your armor, stuck in the mud, you can't get up. You are a turtle on its back. This is the most brutal part of the 10 seconds. An archer finds you. He doesn't try to fight you fairly. He flips you over, kneels on your chest, and looks for the misericord, the mercy gap. He slides a thin blade through your visor, or under your gorget into your throat. This wasn't a battle of honor. It was a systematic execution of the nobility by the working class. The archers took few prisoners because they couldn't afford to guard them. They were there to end the threat, and they did it with the cold efficiency of a butcher. The hygiene and atmosphere of this final stage were hellish. The smell of the mud was mixed with the copper tang of blood, and the stench of thousands of horses and men losing control of their bowels in fear. The longbow effect created a landscape of corpses so thick that the English archers had to climb over piles of bodies to reach the next line of Frenchmen. You realized that your status meant nothing to a man who saw you as a target. The longbowman was the first modern soldier and anonymous dealer of death who didn't care about your name, your family, or your soul. As the rain began to fall on the blood-soaked field of Agincourt, the longbow myth was born. But the longbow reality was much darker. The English won because they turned war into a mechanical process. They realized that a peasant with 20 years of training and a piece of wood was worth more than 1,000 years of noble tradition. But the cost was high. Those archers lived lives of constant pain, their bodies warped by the very weapon that made them famous. They were the disposable heroes of a king who would later leave many of them to die in poverty once the war was over. It's a chilling reminder that the great victories of history are usually just the result of one side finding a more efficient way to break the human body. We look at the longbow as a symbol of English pride, but for the man in the mud at Agincourt, it was just a relentless, whistling death that gave him no chance to fight back. It strips away the romance of the Middle Ages and leaves us with the cold, hard truth. War has always been about physics, and physics doesn't care about your valor. I'm really curious, if you were standing in that mud, hearing that hiss of 5,000 arrows starting to descend, would you have the courage to keep walking, or would you be the first to turn and run? It's a lot easier to talk about chivalry from a sofa than from inside a steel helmet. I love hearing your takes on these impossible historical battles. They show us the real breaking points of the human spirit. If you like this unvarnished, gritty look at how the past actually felt, I'd love for you to join us. We aren't here for the fairy tales. We're here for the truth. Hit that subscribe button and pull up a seat. There are plenty more shadows to explore together. Tell me what you think below. Share your thoughts on the killing power of the past, and I'll see you in the next deep dive into the reality of war.